The Indies were discovered in the year 1492. In the following year, a great many Spaniards went there with the intention of settling the land. Thus, 49 years have passed since the first settlers penetrated the land, the first so claimed being the large and most happy isle called Hispaniola, which is 600 leagues in circumference. Around it in all directions are many other islands, some very big, others very small. All of them were, as we saw with our own eyes, densely populated with native peoples called Indians. This large island was perhaps the most densely populated place in the world. There must be close to 200 leagues of land on this island, and the seacoast has been explored for more than 10,000 leagues, and each day more of it is being explored. And all the land so far discovered is a beehive of people. It is as though God had crowded into these lands the great majority of mankind. And of all the infinite universe of humanity, these people are the most guileless, the most devoid of wickedness and duplicity, the most obedient and faithful to their native masters and to the Spanish Christians whom they serve. They are by nature the most humble, patient, peaceable, holding no grudges, free from embroilments, neither excitable nor quarrelsome. These people are the most devoid of rancors, hatreds, or desire for vengeance of any people in the world. And because they are so weak and complacent, they are less able to endure heavy labor and soon die of no matter what malady. Yet into the sheepfold, into this land of meek outcasts, there came some Spaniards who immediately behaved like ravening wild beasts, wolves, tigers, or lions that had been starved for many days. And Spaniards have behaved in no other way during the past 40 years down to the present time. For they are still acting like ravening beasts, killing, terrorizing, afflicting, torturing, and destroying the native peoples, doing all this with the strangest and most varied new methods of cruelty, never seen or heard before, and to such a degree that this island of Hispaniola, once so populous, having a population that I estimated to be more than 3 million, has now a population of barely 200 persons. This isle of Hispaniola was made up of 6 of their greatest kingdoms, and as many most puissant kings, to whose empire almost all the other lords, whose number was infinite, did pay their allegiance. One of these kingdoms was called Magua, signifying a campaign or open country, which is very observable. If any place in the universe deserves taking notice of, and memorable for the pleasantness of its situation. Then too there exist extraordinary kingdoms among our Indians who live in regions west and south of us. There are large groupings of human beings who live according to a political and social order. There are large cities, there are kings, judges, laws, all within civilizations where commerce occurs, buying and selling and lending and all the other dealings proper to the law of nations. That is to say, their republics are properly set up. There are institutions. And our Indians cultivate friendship and they live in large cities. They manage their affairs in them with goodness and equity, affairs of peace as well as war. They run their governments according to laws that are often superior to our own. And right here, the editor himself chimes in a little bit. Las Casas goes on to explain how the Indians had not only developed artistic skills just as sophisticated as those of Europe, but also how they were able to learn and even improve upon practices like music and handwriting that had come from Old World Europe. Las Casas places himself as a witness to these advances, challenging scholars and politicians in Spain who presented indigenous people as uncivilized flocks without any capacity to govern themselves or assimilate new skills. I have seen all this with my own eyes, touched it with my own hands, heard it with my own ears, over the long time I passed among those people. The island of Cuba is nearly as long as the distance between Valladolid and Rome. It is now almost completely depopulated. San Juan and Jamaica are two of the largest, most productive, and attractive islands. Both are now deserted and devastated. The common ways mainly employed by the Spaniards who call themselves Christian and who have gone there to extirpate those pitiful nations and wipe them off the earth is by unjustly waging cruel and bloody wars. Then, when they have slain all those who fought for their lives or to escape the tortures they would have to endure, that is to say, when they have slain all the native rulers and young men, since the Spaniards usually spare only the women and children, who are subjected to the hardest and bitterest servitude ever suffered by man or beast, they enslave any survivors. With these infernal methods of tyranny, they debase and weaken countless numbers of those pitiful Indian nations. Their reason for killing and destroying such an infinite number of souls is that the Christians have an ultimate aim, which is to acquire gold and to swell themselves with riches in a very brief time, and thus rise to a higher state disproportionate to their merits. It should be kept in mind that their insatiable greed and ambition, the greatest ever seen in the world, is the cause of their villainies. And also those lands are so rich and felicitous, the native peoples so meek and patient, so easy to subject, that our Spaniards have no more consideration for them than beasts. And I say this from my own knowledge of the acts I witnessed. But I should not say than beast, for thanks be to God, they have treated beasts with some respect. I should say instead, like excrement on the public squares, and thus they have deprived the Indians of their lives and souls, for the millions I mentioned have died without the faith and without the benefit of the sacraments. From that time onward, the Indians began to seek ways to throw the Christians out of their lands. They took up arms, but their weapons were very weak and of little service in offense, and still less in defense. Because of this, the wars of the Indians against each other are little more than games played by children. And the Christians, with their horses and swords and pikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against them. They attacked the towns and spared neither children, nor the aged, nor pregnant women, nor women in childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. They laid bets as to who, with one stroke of the sword, could split a man in two, or could cut off his head, or spill out his entrails with a single stroke of the pike. They took infants from their mother's breast, snatching them by the legs and pitching them head first against the crags, or snatched them by the arms and threw them into the rivers, roaring with laughter and saying as the babies fell into the water, "Boil there, you offspring of the devil." Other infants they put to the sword along with their mothers and anyone else who happened to be nearby. They made some low wide gallows on which the hanged victims' feet almost touched the ground, stringing up their victims in lots of 13 in memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles, then set burning wood at their feet and thus burned them alive. To others they attached straw or wrapped their whole bodies in straw and set them afire. With still others, and all those they wanted to capture alive, they cut off their hands and hung them around the victim's neck, saying, "Go now, carry the message," meaning, take the news to the Indians who have fled to the mountains. They usually dealt with chieftains and nobles in the following way. They made a grid of rods, which they placed on forked sticks, then lashed the victims to the grid and lighted a smoldering fire underneath, so that little by little, as those captives screamed in despair and torment, their souls would leave them. After the wars and the killings had ended, when usually there survived only some boys, some women, and children, these survivors were distributed among the Christians to be slaves. Repartimiento, or distribution, was made according to the rank and importance of the Christian to whom the Indians were allocated, one of them being given 30, another 40, still another 1 or 200. As if those Christians, who were as a rule foolish and cruel and greedy and vicious, could be caretakers of souls. And the care they took was to send the men to the mines to dig for gold, which is intolerable labor, and to send the women into the fields of the big ranches to hoe and till the land, work suitable for strong men. Nor to either the men or the women did they give any food except herbs and legumes, things of little substance. The milk in the breast of the woman with infants dried up, and thus in a short while the infants perished. And since men and women were separated, there could be no marital relations. And the men died in the mines, and the women died on the ranches from the same causes, exhaustion and hunger. And thus was depopulated the island which had been densely populated.